The next video we're going to talk about is a topic that most of us don't want to talk about, and that's the idea of sin. Hopefully, by the time I finish explaining some of the components, you might not feel such a strong reaction to this particular word. But if you've ever thought or wanted an example of somebody who wrestled with sin, I encourage you to look at the book of Romans in chapter 7, where Paul talks about he does things he doesn't want to do. It's like his body's at war with him, and he really is struggling for all these things. The Message translation translates verse 15, "The power of sin within me keeps sabotaging my best intentions." And maybe you can relate to that. Chapter 7 of Romans, I encourage you to have a look. It's a common issue. And here's Paul, a man who wrote much of the New Testament, sharing his deep struggles with sin. Well, what is sin? Well, before paradise, and we talked about the transition in the last video, where God created everything good, but people made a choice. So there was this sense where there was no shame and harmony, and there was land and pleasure and God's abundance. And afterwards, there was shame and conflict and pain. The land was cursed. There was alienation and death. So what is sin? Well, it's to fail, to miss the goal. We talked about shalom in the last video. It's to failure to love God and others, or to be truly human. Our own desires compel us. That's the Romans 7 images. I love this idea of vandalism of shalom. So where shalom could be, sin comes in and destroys that. And that is a result of our own actions. And we struggle with that. And people are susceptible to sin because of the nature that we have when we are born. So what's a definition? A sin is any thought, word, deed, or action by a group of people or an individual which damages shalom. And it could be just very blatant, out there shalom breaking, or doing something that we know is wrong. And here's the thing, sin knows where it's headed. In James chapter 1, verses 14 and 15, it talks about the idea that desire gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. And that's the case for everybody. Sin that is left unchecked gives birth to death. And that goal, physical death, emotional death, psychological death, mental, spiritual. You may have grown up in a house where you were the victim of someone else's sin and their death, in the sense of an absent parent or someone who had made poor decisions that you had nothing to control of. That sin impacts all areas of our life. Individually, it's a sin that a person can be held responsible for, and that can be things that we do or things that we don't do. Omission would be things that we don't do, as well as commission, things that we do. And it could be thoughts as well as actions. But then there's also structural and social sin, where there are structures, economic and political. There's a couple examples, Jim Crow laws, or denying women the right to vote. There are things that are established within culture that are also systemic. And so there can be sin in the systems that we can be a part of just perpetuating. And so that's where sometimes people get involved in trying to dismantle systems where sin is at work. And so it's more than just doing the wrong action or thinking the wrong thing or telling a white lie. The consequences of sin are alienation, condemnation, enslavement, and just being rejecting God. So how can we deal with this? And again, this is a micro lecture on this topic. We can choose life. And the incredible thing about Jesus' life and sacrifice is that we have the ability, we have the opportunity to respond to Jesus and to be set free from the sin that enslaves us. And so as you continue through this course, I want you to think about that as a partial way, or as a way, not partial way, a full way of dealing with sin. We've got another lecture to go in this particular module, so I'll join you there in the next class.